Okay. Okay, it's recorded now. And so, good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I am Rodney OBN. I am head of special collections and archives at Mason Library, Keene State College in beautiful Keene, New Hampshire. I'll be your host tonight for the first installment of Archives in Context. Archives in Context is a series of online or Zoom conversations about archives, preservation, and culture in celebration of Archives Month observed in October, which it is October, yes. Our program is sponsored by Keene State's Mason Library, the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration, and the New Hampshire State Archives. I want to say a special thank you to Rachel Onoff of the Vermont State Archives and Dr. Celia Rabinowitz, Dean of Mason Library, for the help and support in organizing this series. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Celia. So to tonight's program, it is my sincere pleasure to introduce our guest, Sarah Galligan, Library Director of the New Hampshire Historical Society, and Paul Carnahan, the Librarian of the Vermont Historical Society. Sarah, of course, serves as Library Director of the New Hampshire Historical Society. After completing an undergraduate degree in history at Dartmouth College, she attended Simmons College. It's actually Simmons University now. That's what they tell me. So, okay. So, where she got a master's degree in library and information science. She has been at the New Hampshire Historical Society since 2013 when she started as a project archivist. She has held internships at Historic New England, the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library, and the John Hayes Estate, the Fells. Paul Carnahan grew up in Brattleboro, Vermont, and was educated at Swarthmore College and the University of Chicago, and returned home to Vermont to be the librarian of the Vermont Historical Society in 1990. He has held that position ever since. As librarian, he oversees the Society's book, photograph, map, ephemera, and manuscript collections. Paul, is there anything else I missed? The Beetle collection or something?
I'm also the IT specialist.
Okay, you're also the IT. Okay. I know that feeling. And speaking of that, he has been working on a recent project to create a digital archive of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on Vermont. So welcome, Paul.
Thank you.
Sarah. So before we get started, we will be taking questions. So post your questions in the Q&A box, and I'll read them as they come in. Also, of course, this program is being recorded and will be made available on Mason Library's Facebook page. I will sort of share the link if people don't know. You can just search for the Mason Library's Facebook page, of course. So welcome again. Without further ado, let's get started. And hi, Paul, Sarah.
Hey.
It's been a while, right?
It has.
A few weeks. So, as I promised, we're just going to have a general conversation. I just, wanting to know what's going on, in your shop and the state and whatnot. And it goes without saying, this past year has been difficult, perhaps for something very interesting. And I guess if Sarah, if you could start, and then Paul, tell us what's been going on. So you want to start, Sarah, or
sure? Jump right in.
Jump right in.
When I can kind of start with, I guess we'll start with kind of the general New Hampshire Historical Society library. Like Paul, we have, like Vermont Historical Society and what Paul manages, we have books, pamphlets, manuscripts, ephemera, maps, which I always forget to tell people maps, so thanks for reminding me of that, broadsides, postcards, and audiovisual material. So it's a range of types of material that we make accessible to people through our library. Prior to the pandemic, we were open Tuesday through Saturday to the public, but with the pandemic in March 2020, we did shut down. But then we reopened in July, and we're now continue to be open Thursday, Friday, Saturday by appointment. So it's been great to be able to serve researchers, even though some of them have a hard time coming in and during the pandemic. We also have increased our online offerings. We continue to digitize material and then also do remote access through copies or questions and research services. So that's kind of a general overview of kind of what's been happening since the pandemic. So I guess I'll leave that there, but let Paul answer, and maybe I can tack on more.
You want to jump in, Paul?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think a lot of things are very similar between the two organizations. We did reopen in June, so a little earlier than Sarah, and we were by appointment initially. We're now fully open to people to come in. We're back to our normal hours, which are Tuesday through Friday, 9 to 4, Wednesdays tonight until 8. I'm not in the library. My colleague Marjorie Strong is working tonight. And then we're open one Saturday a month, second Saturday of each month, 9 to 4. So we're back to our normal hours. Certainly not seeing the type of walk-in patronage that we used to see. We also changed traffic patterns a little bit in our building. The Vermont Historical Society is in a separate building from our museum. Our museum is in downtown Montpelier. The Historical Society is in a building we call the Vermont History Center in Barrie. It's an old renovated high school building, quite a nice high school building. I shouldn't say it is old, but it's a Richardsonian Romanesque building that's been nicely renovated. But so we don't have the walk-in traffic that we might if we were part of a museum location. We did have changing exhibits before the pandemic in our building. We've made quite an effort over the past 4 or 5 years to do some special exhibit programming in that building. And we just weren't getting the foot traffic in the exhibits that we had hoped. So we're sort of rethinking that now. We have not reopened our exhibit space, and we probably won't in the Vermont History Center. And all that is to say that we now have sort of a little different traffic pattern bringing people into the building. They just come up straight from the elevator onto the second floor. So we don't have people coming in on the first floor. We, of course, ask people who aren't vaccinated to wear masks. We've been wearing masks ourselves now for the past several weeks as the Delta variant takes hold, and we're trying to see that through. So yeah, that's sort of where we've gone. The institution as a whole, as most cultural institutions, have been doing a lot of online programming, which we think has been going very well. It's much easier for a state organization like ours to reach our audience online and with Zoom than asking people to come out and come to Barrie or come to Montpelier. That tends to sort of discourage people. So in terms of the institutional outreach, that's been going well. And then we've been doing some digital projects and hoping to plan for others in the future. I can talk more about that as we go. But yeah, I think like everyone, we're trying to reach our audiences digitally now as much as possible.
Do you see both in both of your institutions? Do you see more traffic online? Is that something that you've been tracking, or Sarah, Paul?
Yeah, we do a really bad job tracking things. We were seeing a lot of traffic online before. It's just easier for people to send an email than to make their way to Barry. So I'd certainly say a consistent amount of traffic online. Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, I would echo. We've seen a pretty good, consistent amount of traffic online. I would though say that we have seen an increase in people requesting copies of books that we have. They oftentimes want whole books. So,
wow.
Question. And then we've also seen an increase in research services, and that's where we do the research for people who cannot come to the society, as well as an uptick in image requests. So people wanting to use our images for any number of reasons, where they want to put it on their wall or publish it in a book. And it's interesting when we don't quite know whether that's because of the pandemic. We also just whether our digital images and catalog records are getting more traction online. So it's an interesting question that we don't really know the answer to, I guess.
Yeah. Do you both think you'll be putting, I mean, if you know, more of your efforts and resources to digitizing materials to be online with more of a focus that, you know, what's going on will be more of the normal, where you'll get more traffic online just because where we are now with, you know, the pandemic?
Yeah, definitely. We're trying to do more, and we've got a couple of grants for planning grants out to NHPRC and NEH to do a statewide digital platform. Vermont's one of the few states that doesn't actually have a digital platform, so we recognize the need to do something about that. So we're hoping to get some grant money to help us do a little planning. Within the institution, we're using the MECA site, which we call Digital Vermont. You can find it at digitalvermont.org. It's good for what we're doing now, but it definitely has limitations, particularly with our own programming capabilities. So we're hoping to do something a little better on that area. We put up some images, just made it go live end of last week, I think, a small collection of photographs from the Barry Montpelier Road, which is the commercial strip that connects Barry and Montpelier. We got a gift last year of sort of artistic photographs from a photographer who took photos in the 1970s, 1975. Like so many things that happen this way, you know, he decided he wanted to get rid of the photos. He didn't want to toss them out, so he brought them to us, which we were appreciative of. And then I worked with a summer intern to scan those, sent her out to try to take some pictures of similar locations. We had quite a fun time trying to figure out the locations. As I say, these were sort of artistic photos, so they were a lot of really close-up views of signs and corners of buildings and things like that. So it wasn't like expansive views that we might like to see in a historical collection, but they were historic nevertheless. So we took pictures of, or she took pictures of the similar places, and then we expanded a little bit, scanned some postcards, got into adding some other, we had a poster for a skating, roller skating rink that's long gone, that was there on the Barry Montpelier Road. We just happened to have that, so we added that. It's not an interpretive exhibit. It's definitely a, you know, sort of a database library type approach to putting information up there and hoping someone will use it. But the I guess the sort of the then and now photos were somewhat curated, but that's the sort of thing we're trying to do. We're trying to grab topics that are manageable, that would interest people. It's really hard to predict what people are going to be looking for, and maybe we can talk about that too. But that's one project that we did sort of at the end of the pandemic here now.
Yeah, we try to, so I want to say 2013 was when the New Hampshire Historical Society started kind of digitizing their archival and special collections. Our museum side had been digitizing their objects for a while. So if you go online, we have, I don't know, 35,000 museum objects, and I think at least 20,000 are digitized. So they've really done a wonderful job over there. And then in the library side, we try to, as new items come in the door, if they're kind of discreet and manageable, as Paul said, try to get them scanned and up online immediately, and also not like under copyright or anything. And then for larger collections, kind of the approach we've taken is fundraising. So like we've gotten donation to digitize all of John Stark's papers, so those are all online. Josiah Bartlett, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence from New Hampshire. Items like the Amherst Congregational Church, we had an interested donor who wanted to put those online, and church records are great for not only history, but also genealogy. So that's a fun item. And we've also worked on digitizing our photograph collections. So kind of discrete projects like that. And coming up, we've gotten funding to do New Hampshire Bankers Association records, some Abbott Downing Company records. So it's matching also people who are interested in getting collections online or who have the funds to get them online with the capability.
So are you sending that's impressive. Are you sending those records and personal papers out, or are you doing those in-house when you digitize those?
So it depends on the project. Like John Stark and Josiah Bartlett and others we've sent out. We typically send them to Northeast Document Conservation Center. So projects that kind of are a big bulk, like maybe over 500, 1,000 items that we just don't have the in-house staff capability of scanning and then cataloging and getting them online. So outsourcing the scanning really makes it a lot more manageable.
Yeah, we haven't taken on anything that big. We're sort of still in the low-hanging fruit stage. We haven't really tackled, a big personal paper or business records collection.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure which one we would do. Our most, we did, I had a different intern working on scanning some genealogy research papers of a guy that we got in the 1980s, I guess, who'd done research in a particular section of Vermont, the Champlain Islands, sort of a very discrete geographic area. And so we scanned some of those, but that's a huge collection, and we don't have the resources to do a full thing.
Yeah, that's kind of the challenge, is finding the resources.
Yeah.
Money to do it, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to return to something that Paul, I think, said. I'm curious, for the people that are coming to see you, what are they looking for? What are the hot things or the common requests? And has that changed since the pandemic, since lockdown, or us coming out? Just out of curiosity.
I don't think that's changed since the pandemic. I certainly have seen a big change over my career there. I could
sure, go ahead.
A few comments about that.
Sure. Why don't
I think I think that the digitization of information has affected our operations way more than the pandemic. But certainly over my 30 years there, we used to see people coming as they were beginning the genealogical search, and we would have to sort of introduce them to the basics and the reference books and the census indexes and whatnot. And now it's clearly them coming to us at the end of their search. They've exhausted all the online sources, or they perceive that they've exhausted the online resources. That's not necessarily true. But they are looking for the small, minute really trying to flesh out some of the information that they've already done online. So they found online. So we do far less, I would say, general instructional work with patrons in terms of the realm of what's out there. We obviously have to do instruction as to how to find things at our facility and to give them some ideas, but usually it's it's pretty tough going in the genealogy area. In the straight history, I don't know that there's any particular tough or hot topics. I think and Sarah probably finds this too. I mean, our work, and I think why we're in this work, is you never know what you're going to be getting the next day when you come into work. All bets are off, and it really runs the gamut of people looking for different types of information about our state. Certainly, probably more about underserved populations or minority populations than in the past, and those are real tough too. Because a lot of that information is just not in the type of records that we collect. But we work with them with other resources that we sometimes have available, and try to give them some ideas in that regard.
Sarah, any hot topics? Go ahead.
I would say that definitely tracks with the New Hampshire Historical Society too. I think, and that's really interesting what Paul had to say about genealogy, and I think that's very true. Like most of the questions we get are kind of like that needle in the haystack, like, my great 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 aunt married this man in Ware, New Hampshire. Do you have his record? So it's kind of interesting.
For us, we get so many questions now about the very earliest time of people settling in Vermont, which is later than for New Hampshire. But people. The early 1700s, someone got married in the early 1750s, and I can't find the record. It's like, no kidding. And you do have to explain to people that people were not, for Vermont in that time period, it was a frontier. People were not spending their time recording these events that we now want to know about.
Yeah, and I think during the pandemic too, it's been interesting, and this may change if we were to kind of open up and accept walk-ins, which we do. Like if we're not full and someone wants to do research, we're certainly welcoming them in. But we used to have kind of regular genealogists, and we haven't seen them quite as much as we used to. So that's just one population. But yeah, I would agree. There's like every day it's a different topic. It's an interesting thing about it is that there's so much information, and even if someone wants to look at the same papers, they're doing it from a different angle, and so they want different items or different they're looking for something different from the records. So it's kind of a fun way to go about the day or life sometimes.
So I guess the question is, since a lot of your patrons, obviously, they're interested in genealogy. Do you think, since the popularity to sites like Ancestry.com, do you think that's sort of taken away some of your requests? People going to sites like that before going to your repositories? Is that,
oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I mean, you can even see some of our numbers have kind of slowed down over the years.
And with good reason. I mean, the amount of information you could find there is just just spectacular. So yeah.
And with sites like Google Books and Internet Archive, and kind of the ability to get books like that online is also kind of made it easier to get access to some of those older rare books that libraries like Michigan or Harvard have digitized.
I wanted to ask, I guess, so what are you finding? I think I got two questions I had. I could remember them. One, I'll ask this one first. In terms of the past year, or a gift or two, a significant gift that you've gotten, you could talk about that, something noteworthy or something that you find interesting, that you've received, something that's, I don't know, anything that we should know about, anything fun, maybe controversial, you can tell us about.
Oh boy.
Or not. Don't you can, you're going to get in trouble with your board, right? You can
right.
Yeah,
Controversial. I don't know. We don't deal with
you don't
controversy that I can think of.
Well,
I'm trying to think. I'll explain one fun gift that we got that actually interfaced very briefly with the collection of the New Hampshire Historical Society.
Okay.
It's a collection that could go either way in terms of a museum collection or a library collection. We chose to treat it as a library collection. But it was a collection of illustrations of locomotives that were done probably the end of the 19th, early 20th century. They're not dated. We know who did them. There are maybe, what are there, 45 of them or so. They're colorful illustrations. They're sort of pen and ink outlines, very flat. They're sort of two-dimensional, somewhat primitive illustrations of locomotives, mostly for Vermont rail lines, which is why we got them. And they had, we got them, of course, in a circuitous way. They were done by this guy, this Vermonter, whose obituary said that he had quite a collection of railroad relics and a museum, that he had a museum of railroad relics and drawings, I think, which I think we're probably referring to these drawings. But they were out in California. And this California Railroad Historical Society said, what are we doing with these? And they finally contacted the Rutland Railroad Historical Society in Vermont, and they said, well, we don't have any place for these. And so they contacted us. Would we take them? And we looked at photographs of them and said yes. And it intersects with the New Hampshire Historical Society because the museum side of their operation had one of these illustrations. And I just Googled the train name and came up with one of these drawings that was very similar to the one that I had. And so I dropped them an email, let them know. Now we know who the artist was. At that point, they hadn't. So I think if these had come in, so these are sort of art which would technically go in the museum side of operations, but there's so many of them that it really sort of becomes a library task to house them and provide access to them and inventory them and what have you. So we've created an inventory, of course. Librarians, archivists love to do that. And hopefully we can scan them and put them online soon so that other people can enjoy them. So that's one gift that came in. I think it came in last year right when we'd reopened, I think, in the pandemic, right about June or July. Yeah.
Sarah, anything noteworthy?
Oh yeah, I mean, noteworthy stuff every day. We get
Okay.
It makes me dread packages sometimes. But a really fun or a great collection that we recently got is some people may be familiar with the blog. It's called Cow Hampshire, and it's written by a woman named Janice Brown, and she does a great job of documenting kind of lesser known aspects of New Hampshire life. Like she did a really great during the anniversary of World War I. She did a really great job documenting like the different towns and who served from those towns. And during anniversary of women's suffrage, she kind of highlighted those lesser known women who contributed to the suffrage movement in New Hampshire. And she called and she was downsizing, and she has decided to donate her entire collection of historical objects and books to the Historical Society, which is fabulous because not only do we get the items, but we also get all the research that she's done of them over the years through her blog. So kind of it's going to be a really rich collection and way to access, I think, those lesser known stories. And Paul kind of referred to those earlier, that people want kind of more marginalized groups and less the important white men of the 19th century. So it's kind of great to have that kind of collection where we can kind of dive into different stories rather than our friends like Franklin Pierce and Daniel Webster. So, but we also recently purchased, so we purchased as well, Daniel Webster's private correspondence. He published a book by his son Fletcher Webster, and it was engraved to Franklin Pierce. So it was a nice story about how these men interacted, and so we've got a full circle of Webster Pierces in our little library, which I find fun.
All right. I think I had this conversation with Sarah I think a year or two ago, when my students came to visit, and thank you for hosting our students for college. In terms of when you accept things, it has to go through a board, a collection committee. Is that so? And I'm gonna ask the same thing to Paul. When you get things, how are they vetted? Or can you just get what you want? I guess that's yeah.
So the official process is,
okay.
Item comes in and it gets kind of written up. We get a short history on it, or you talk about it, and it goes to our staff acquisitions committee, which is made up of collections and administrative staff members. So when they agree to it, we give it an accession number, and then quarterly we have collections committee and board meetings. And the collections list of new accessions goes to the collections committee first to approve, and once they approve it, it goes to the board. Which oftentimes for library books, I don't necessarily go through the staff committee first, because we're getting 25, 30 library books a quarter, plus 35, 40, or however many archival items. So the workload of writing a short sentence or short paragraph on why we should keep this postcard or this photograph doesn't often go through the staff first. I just this is something that we should keep. So I kind of make those decisions unilaterally sometimes. But I think if anyone saw the list and said, "What is this?" Then it would be questioned, but try not to make too many decisions in a vacuum. And we have pretty good interaction, like with the director of collections over at the museum and other staff, so they know what's going on and what's coming in the door. It's not like a total surprise. And so it's not like letters from someone in Utah to someone else in Idaho. So we're trying to but
Paul, is your process similar?
Well, no. We're pretty informal, the Vermont Historical Society, on the library side of things. So for better or worse, I'm making most of the decisions, although I wouldn't say unilaterally. We work there's just two of us. And we work pretty closely together. We work in the same room. So when we're in the office space, so, we just informally talk about, something that's come in, or I let Marjorie know that, so-and-so is coming in with something. I can't imagine having to write up everything. That would be a real tough act to follow. And the board, we don't seek approval of the board. really the only time when I need to seek approval is when I'm spending lots of money. So for when there are bidding situations, I have to get approval, obviously, from the director. I think above $1,500, I think, is the cutoff. And then above a certain amount, he's got to go to the collections committee. But usually things are pretty, when we find out about things, it's usually fairly quick that we have to act when we find out about things, for sale. It's different. It's interesting, and perhaps we should be following a more rigid system. The museum does there, but they are much more selective than a library or an archive, which is usually how I explain the differences. But they don't take anything until the collections committee meets quarterly and approves accepting it. I couldn't imagine trying to work like that in a library situation. I mean, we already have stuff piled up all over the place. And we just wouldn't have the the space to put those things out and wait for a decision of the board. And it's much more, in the library, in the museum world, it's much more of a visual, aesthetic sort of decision. Is it better condition than the one we already have, or does it tell us? I mean, the big thing now with items in the museum is, does it tell a story? Does it have a good background? In the library and the archive, I mean, we're trying to be much more comprehensive, I would say. Everyone's story is important, and I think if we'd actually been applying some of these rules, 50 years ago, we wouldn't have the diversity that we want now, because the people who were collecting then, may not have thought that the granite worker's diary was all that valuable. So we tend to go much broader than a museum collection, which is also our, we're also creating tons of work for ourselves. And trying to meet these ideals of collecting broadly. So yeah, it's a much more informal, off the cuff sort of decision-making process for us. I would comment. I used to think that about books, and I don't know if you've found this, Sarah, or not, but we are acquiring far fewer books than we did, say, 20 years ago. The amount of publishing that's going on in Vermont, is just very small. There are very few publishers in Vermont anymore, and national publishers don't publish Vermont titles. With most of the books we get, frankly, are the Arcadia History Press, semi-vanity press, or local societies who have maybe not used one of those publishers, but have self-published books. Now I could probably set aside the books and ask if people wanted to acquire them, but I think there's little question that we would not accept a Vermont title. But I compile a list for our journal, Vermont History, that we call New in Vermont History. That's basically a new book acquisition list that's narrowly focused on Vermont history. And the number of titles in that list are just way down. And in fact, there was one issue 2 or 3, 4 issues ago where we just said, skip it. We're going to use the space for something else, and we combined lists. And these lists, these are only twice a year. The journal only comes out twice. So it's a very interesting evolution in terms of writing and publishing on Vermont history, on small regional history.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that sentiment that it's a lot less publishing on kind of New Hampshire history topics. I would say a lot of our book acquisitions, some of them are historical. So if like a pamphlet was published in 1829 and we don't have it, it still goes on that list.
Oh,
Yeah. And then also a lot of like, not just kind of those History Press Arcadia, but like self-published items on New Hampshire history, or even printouts of people's like research or notes or theses that we often catalog as in the book collection rather than in the archival collection. So, and that's kind of the choice of how our collections are organized. And so sometimes something could go either way. And so that's why I think like cataloging is so important, because you look at it and it's like, oh, well, this is kind of an unbound volume of work rather than a strict book. So.
I think that's the case. Less publishing, and I know that's the case in my own collection. I wanted to ask sort of broader questions, as you two of you seasoned professionals in the special collections and archive world. What do you think will be the challenge? What are the challenges for, as you see, for special collections, librarians, archivists, curators? What do you see, either more broadly in a profession or in New Hampshire, Vermont? I know that's a really broad question, but you react to it however you want. Just curious. What do you find are the challenges, or will be the challenges, or are the challenges for the profession? Some of my students would want me to ask that sort of question. So, you want to start off, Sarah?
Sure, I'll think of kind of some, and Paul can add on, and then I can comment again. Hide. I mean, one of the big challenges right now is space issues. So we've been collecting for so long, and if you look at collections from the end of the 20th century, like these paper collections are just huge because people have kind of amassed a bunch of paper. And so kind of considering how to go about A, collecting those, and B, providing space and access to them. And then there's that quick transition from huge amounts of paper to no paper at all, everything kind of being online and digital. So that will be something that we have to tackle, is how to create access and organize and ingest and kind of get those digital files out there. So that's kind of like in a back end thinking way. And I think also that just keep making sure that people continue to see the value of historical research collections that focus on particular topics. So like New Hampshire or Vermont, and understand that like the foundation of their state and their history and kind of what they value about their state and history is not only housed in like the environment, but it's also housed in these historical institutions.
Paul?
Yeah, I would agree with Sarah on most of those points, and I guess I would expand a little bit on the digital collecting theme. That's certainly something that, as State Historical Society, or certainly my State Historical Society, has not faced. We are sort of hoping that a solution will come along, I would say. It's I think it's extremely different than in a college or university or a state archive, where there are systems in place, where systems have been developed to capture the digital output of faculty members or state employees. And there's all sorts of programs, and this stuff is just getting sucked in. When you're dealing with the private sector, there's no there's no structure out there to capture that. And everyone's emails are not being captured in a way that a local historical society can use them. I'm sure the governor's email is, and the State Archives is taking care of that. But
Not in New Hampshire.
not New Hampshire. Oh my. But you know, certainly the local activists, you know, you know, LGBT rights activists, we don't have any way of capturing his, her, their records. And that's a real challenge. What are we going to do? How are we going to document this past you know, decade with the traditional tools that we have? The flip side of that, or is, you know, trying to, maybe that suggests that we need to refocus our collecting, going along with what Sarah was talking about in terms of space. I think it's also a question of what's in our collections. For years, you know, we've collected these great runs of journals, you know, American Quarterly, some of the State Historical Society journals, and you know, people are not coming in and using them. They are just sitting on the shelves. And a while ago, we cleared out a lot of State Historical Society journals that are out in New England. You know, we said we just can't commit the space to, you know, all these great historical societies, Wisconsin and Ohio and places like that. But people, our patrons, the people who walk through the door are not looking for the Wisconsin Historical Society journal. And so, and I even am beginning to question some of the regional journals that I think they are attractive primarily to faculty members, and you know, we don't have them. So we've got a whole nother set of challenges, which goes along again with something Sarah said about underscoring the importance of State Historical Society collections. Is you know, we don't have a built-in faculty and student population, graduate student population to use our collections. So we really are depending on the amateur historian, the journalist, the author, people like that, grad students who are innovative and get beyond the four walls of their institutions. You know, there's something called the New England Regional Fellowship Consortium that gives grants to upper level researchers, PhD, post-PhD researchers. That's been really good to bring people to our institution. But you know, certainly during the pandemic, that that was a big problem. And it's only a drop in the bucket. You know, we really need to be working on how do we promote the concept of research to the greater public. And I think my you know, my director is very interested in that that issue. And what sort of institution are we? We are a membership supported institution, but are we there to serve our members, or are we there with a greater social purpose? And I think the answer is that, you know, we have a greater social cultural purpose, but so much of the way we operate is in service to our members. So we need to sort of expand more broadly and try to emphasize, as Sarah was suggesting, emphasize that greater service that we're there to provide.
Yeah, and we like to say that what is valuable, the people who are define what is valuable to them in our collections may not even be born yet. So it's a hard thing to define sometimes.
I think, I want to get back to that if we have time. Let me ask you. There's someone who's posted something in the Q&A. Both questions are by Wiss, and if anyone else has a question, please post either in the Q&A or the chat. Wiz asked two questions. First one is about the digital platform, TDR, or just something like Omeka that's a publication platform. And the other half of that question, or second question he asks, is tell us about the metadata you add to your scanned issues, please. So I guess he's just asking what systems you are using, or is it just sort of a system like Omeka, and what metadata do you use to describe what you have?
I can
or not.
Right now, we do have a pretty controlled system, so to how we manage our back-end images. So we have IT departments that work on it, but we are looking into like a trusted digital repository, something like Preservica, or something that keeps track of the digital files to make sure they're not diminished over time. So right now, that is something kind of we're looking into, and I think that goes along with what Paul was talking about, was the digital archive and how you capture that information and then keep it accessible and usable. So right now we do not have a TDR, so to speak, and we just have that front end catalog interface, which combines our back end collections management systems. And in terms of metadata that we add to our images, we do embed metadata into the image. It's not our full descriptive metadata that you would find in the catalog. So it's more technical metadata, and then rights and ownership. So it gives a little bit idea of where the image came from within our collection. So it'll always have a collection number or a key to where to find it within our collection, but it'll also say like this image was produced by the New Hampshire Historical Society, when it was produced by the New Hampshire Historical Society, in the hopes that when it floats to the ether, if someone were to look at it, they'd still see that, oh, I want to use this image, where is it from? So I hope that answers your question.
So
Mine, Paul.
we're still trying to figure things out, and I think that's the purpose of our planning grant to NHPRC. The top priority is to get images published on the web, and then we are going to look to see what sort of TDR system might work in conjunction with that. But that's one of the big issues that we have to work on. The state archives, which is much more sophisticated technologically than we are, is certainly pushing very hard to include a TDR component in that. I'm a little concerned about the cost and the complexity that adds to the project. So we're going to have to work that out. Right now, we do not have a TDR in any way, shape, or form. We haven't done a lot of embedding metadata in images. We did a little bit of that with the Barry Montpelier Road project that I just mentioned, although we probably weren't as consistent as we need to be. The person or Wiz asked about your issue about the metadata for issues. I don't know if that was a particular question about something she caught or not, but I will comment that we sort of have a split personality in the creation of metadata. So we are creating metadata for the online catalog. That's much more rigid, following Library of Congress subject headings. And we do catalog, and that's where the issues part came up. We do catalog articles from Vermont History, our journal, and so that is through the OPAC, so that's using standard Library of Congress subject headings. Metadata on the Digital Vermont side is much more flexible. We try to stick with Library of Congress subject headings, but there's no authority control mechanism within Omeka at this point, or it's pretty loose if there is. And that tends to be done by volunteers and interns. So you started introducing all sorts of variants there. The online catalog, we're much more limited on who creates metadata for that, although we do use a couple of volunteers to help us out with that.
Thank you, Paul. I know Wiz had some follow-ups, so I'll try to send those to you to answer, but I know we're running up against the 8 o'clock hour. I promised to keep it up to the 8. I mean, I was hoping to get some sort of reflection about, some things that you were talking about, to summarize that the likely is going to be a history deficit because, as you were both saying, as we move from paper to more digitized, records or information, capturing that is just difficult. There's a desire to capture it, but not necessarily the means or the money. And so this realization that you will be redefining sort of who will be your future users, current future users, and collecting. What are you sort of redefining perhaps the things you're going to collect to be more inclusive, more expansive. So is that a fair estimate of what you kind of So
yeah,
I guess that's a challenge, So anyway, I wish we had another hour we could talk about that. But I promise both of you, and I really appreciate you sharing your evening with us. You're very gracious. So Sarah and Paul, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us. And if you have any questions, send them to me. I think most of everyone has my email address, and I can share that with Sarah and or with Paul, and be glad to do that. Our next program is scheduled in the series of Archives and Context for Tuesday, October 12th, 7 p.m. We will have John Levine, who's the project archivist at the Vermont Jazz Center. And John will be talking about some of the exciting projects that are going on at the center, particularly one, I think it's a digital preservation, digital conservation project they're doing with NEDC, the Northeast Document Conservation Center. So with that, thank you everyone who joined us tonight. And again, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Paul. And I hope to see you in person someday soon.
Yeah, yeah. Gotta get together.
Yeah, let's have a party. Yes.
All right. Yeah.
All right.
Definitely.
All right. Great. Well, thank you again. Take care. And
thank you, Rodney.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, Sarah. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Okay. Bye.